2.3 million blocks of stone, each one heavier than a family car, stacked with a precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Built by a civilization that had never seen a wheel, never forged iron, and wrote on papyrus scrolls. This is the Great Pyramid of Giza, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. A structure so massive it held the record as the tallest building on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. And here's what keeps archaeologists awake at night. We still don't fully agree on how they did it. Some say it was ramps, others say it was levers and counterweights. A few claim ancient technology we've since forgotten. And yes, there are those who whisper about visitors from the stars, but in the last few years something changed. New discoveries, hidden corridors, a vanished river beneath the sand, ancient graffiti that rewrites history. The truth, it turns out, is more incredible than any conspiracy theory. This is the story of how the impossible was built. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are where the madness begins. The Great Pyramid rises 146 meters into the Egyptian sky. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty, taller than Big Ben. For over 3,800 years, nothing humans built came close. The base covers an area of 53,000 square meters. You could fit 10 football fields inside its footprint, and it's made of approximately 2.3 million individual blocks of limestone and granite. The average block weighs 2.5 tons. That's roughly the weight of 2 Honda Civics stacked on top of each other. The largest blocks in the King's Chamber? 80 tons. That's the weight of a fully loaded Boeing 737. Now here's where it gets truly insane. The base of the pyramid is level to within 2.1 centimeters across 230 meters. Your kitchen counter probably isn't that flat. The four sides are aligned to true north with an error of just 3 arc minutes. That's 1/15th of a single degree. Modern architects with GPS and laser equipment would be proud of that precision. The joints between some of the casing stones are so tight you cannot fit a razor blade between them. And mainstream archaeology tells us this was completed in roughly 20 years. Let's do the math. If they worked 12 hours a day, 365 days a year, that's one block positioned every 2.5 minutes. Day and night. No weekends. No holidays. For 2 entire decades. With no wheels, no pulleys, no iron tools. Something extraordinary happened here. Something we're only now beginning to understand. To understand how they built it, we need to understand when they built it, and who they were. The year is approximately 2560 BC. The Bronze Age is in full swing. While most of humanity lives in small villages, farming and herding, Egypt has already become something unprecedented. A unified nation-state with a centralized government, a professional bureaucracy, and engineering expertise unmatched anywhere on Earth. Think of ancient Egypt as the Silicon Valley of the Bronze Age, the place where the smartest people gathered, where innovation happened, where the impossible became routine. The Nile River was their superhighway. Every year, like clockwork, the river flooded, depositing rich black soil across the farmland and making agriculture almost effortless. This abundance created surplus. Surplus created specialists. Specialists created wonders. And at the top of this civilization sat Pharaoh Khufu. History hasn't been kind to Khufu's memory. Greek historian Herodotus, writing 2,000 years later, painted him as a cruel tyrant who forced his people into slave labor. Hollywood loved this image. Whips cracking. Thousands of slaves groaning under impossible burdens. But Herodotus never visited a working pyramid construction site. He was repeating rumors and legends, centuries after the fact. The truth is radically different. Khufu wasn't just building a tomb. In Egyptian cosmology, the pyramid was a resurrection machine. Its very shape represented the rays of the sun, hardened into stone. The pharaoh's body would rest inside, protected forever, while his soul ascended the sloping walls to join Ra in the eternal sky. This wasn't vanity. This was theology, and the entire nation believed in it. To build his stairway to heaven, Khufu mobilized something the ancient world had never seen: a permanent construction workforce, supported by rotating teams of seasonal laborers. Farmers who came during the flood season when their fields were underwater anyway. Craftsmen who saw this as the greatest project of their generation. Engineers who knew their names would echo through eternity. Not slaves building under the whip, citizens building their nation's greatest monument. In 1990, a tourist on horseback stumbled over a low mud brick wall south of the Great Pyramid. That accidental discovery would change everything we thought we knew about pyramid construction. Archaeologists began excavating. What they found was a city. They call it Hayt el Garab, the workers' village. And it's a revelation. Long dormitory buildings that could house up to 2,000 workers at a time. Bakeries with massive ovens producing thousands of loaves of bread daily. Breweries, because ancient Egyptians considered beer a food, not a luxury. Fish processing facilities. Meat preparation areas with the bones of cattle, sheep, and goats scattered in enormous quantities. The archaeological team calculated that the workers consumed 21 cattle and 23 sheep every single day. That's enough protein to feed an army. These weren't starving slaves surviving on scraps. These were well-fed professionals doing the most important work of their civilization. But the most powerful evidence came from the cemetery. Just west of the village, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of tombs belonging to pyramid workers. Simple tombs, yes. Not royal chambers. But proper burials, oriented correctly, with grave goods for the afterlife. Some workers were buried in small mastabas, miniature versions of noble tombs. Think about what that means. Slaves don't get buried near pharaohs. Slaves don't receive funeral rites. Slaves aren't given supplies for their journey to the afterlife. These workers were honored, respected, remembered. And then came the graffiti. Inside the pyramid itself, in chambers that were sealed for 45 centuries, archaeologists found red paint markings on the stones. Work crew names, tallies, organizational notes that were never meant to be seen by anyone but the builders themselves. The names are extraordinary: Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkaure, followers of the powerful White Crown of Khufu, the Craftsman Gang. These aren't the marks of forced labor. These are the marks of teams who took pride in their work, who gave themselves nicknames, who were building something they believed in. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most famous archaeologist, put it simply: slaves would never have been buried in the shadow of the pyramids. They would never have prepared their tombs for eternity. This wasn't oppression. This was the ancient world's greatest collaborative achievement. Now let's get to the engineering. Because even with a motivated workforce, you still have to move 2.5 million giant stones. The first problem: where does the rock come from? The core blocks, the bulk of the pyramid, came from quarries on the Giza plateau itself, just a few hundred meters south of the construction site. Limestone, relatively soft when first cut, hardening with exposure to air. Workers carved channels into the bedrock using copper chisels and wooden mallets. Then they drove dry wooden wedges into cracks and soaked them with water. As the wood expanded, the stones split along predictable lines. In 2018, archaeologists discovered a complete, half-finished block still sitting in an ancient quarry. Beside it, the tools that carved it: copper chisels, wooden mallets, ropes, stone hammers. The workers had simply walked away one day, leaving a time capsule for us to find. Experiments using replica tools showed that a team of 4 workers could extract a 2.5-ton block in about 4 days. Not fast, but fast enough when you have thousands of workers operating simultaneously. The core limestone was the easy part. The fine white casing stones that once covered the entire pyramid came from Tura, across the Nile. The granite for the king's chamber came from Aswan, 800 kilometers to the south. 80-ton blocks transported across a nation. This is where the real genius shows. For decades, scholars wondered how Egyptians moved these massive stones across the desert without wheels. The answer was hiding in plain sight, painted on a tomb wall at Jehuti-Hotep from around 1900 BC. The painting shows a massive statue being dragged on a wooden sledge. Dozens of workers pull ropes, and in front of the sledge, a man pours water onto the sand. For years, people assumed this was ceremonial, ritual purification. Then in 2014, physicists at the University of Amsterdam decided to actually test it. They built a sledge. They loaded it with weight. They dragged it across dry sand, then wet sand. The results were staggering. Dry sand piles up in front of a moving sledge, creating friction that makes movement nearly impossible. But add the right amount of water, between 2 and 5% of the sand volume, and something magical happens. The water creates capillary bridges between sand grains, making the surface firm and slippery. Friction drops by as much as 50%. The Egyptians weren't performing rituals. They were applying physics they had discovered through generations of trial and error. But here's what makes the transportation story even more remarkable. In May 2024, researchers announced a discovery that had been hiding beneath the Egyptian farmland for millennia, an extinct branch of the Nile River. They call it the Ahramat Branch. In Arabic, Ahramat means pyramids. Using satellite radar imagery and ground-penetrating surveys, scientists mapped a 64-kilometer waterway that once flowed along the base of the Western Desert Plateau, directly past the pyramid fields from Giza to Lisht. This wasn't a small stream. At its peak, the Ahramat Branch was half a kilometer wide and at least 25 meters deep, comparable to the modern Nile itself. And here's the key detail. Many pyramids have ceremonial causeways extending from their bases. These causeways lead down toward the floodplain and simply end. Archaeologists always found this puzzling. Now we know where they ended, at the riverbank. The pyramids weren't built in the middle of the desert. They were built at river harbors. Each causeway was a loading dock. Imagine it. Barges carrying multi-ton granite blocks floating up from Aswan. Crews unloading them onto wooden sledges, hauling them up causeways slicked with water. The Nile wasn't just Egypt's highway. It was the construction crane that built the pyramids. The Ahramat Branch began drying up around 200 years ago, victim of a mega drought that contributed to the collapse of the Old Kingdom itself. Within centuries, it was gone, buried under sand and agricultural development. But for the pyramid builders, it was the essential artery that made everything possible. So they quarried the stone. They transported it by river and sledge. But now comes the hardest question of all. How did they lift it? The Great Pyramid rises at an angle of about 52 degrees. The blocks needed to reach heights of over 100 meters. And they did it without cranes, without pulleys, without any mechanical advantage beyond ropes and human muscle. The dominant theory for centuries has been ramps. But here's the problem. What kind of ramp? A straight ramp leading from ground level to the pyramid's peak would need to be over 1.5 kilometers long to maintain a manageable slope. Such a ramp would require more material than the pyramid itself, and no archaeological evidence of such a massive structure has ever been found. Spiral ramps wrapping around the exterior face different problems. They would block surveyors, sight lines, making it impossible to maintain the precise geometry. They would also need to be dismantled as the casing stones were placed, leaving no trace. Then, in 1999, French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed something radical. What if the ramp was inside? Houdin spent years creating detailed 3D computer models of the Great Pyramid. His theory, the lower third, was built using a conventional external ramp. But once that was complete, the external ramp was dismantled, its stones recycled into the upper pyramid. From that point on, construction continued using an internal spiral ramp built within the pyramid structure itself. The internal ramp would turn 90 degrees at each corner of the pyramid, where temporary openings allowed blocks to be rotated before continuing upward. For years, this was dismissed as speculation. Then the evidence started appearing. In the 1980s, a French team had surveyed the Great Pyramid using microgravimetry, measuring density variations within the structure. Their scans showed a strange spiral pattern they couldn't explain. Not until Houdin looked at the data did anyone recognize it, the ghostly signature of an internal ramp. In 2008, Egyptologist Bob Breyer climbed to a mysterious notch 2/3 up the pyramid's northeast corner. This notch, roughly 18 feet on each side, precisely matches where Houdin predicted a turning station should exist. Inside, Breyer found a previously unknown L-shaped chamber. A space with no apparent purpose unless it was part of an internal construction system. Even more intriguing. In 1986, a member of the French survey team witnessed a desert fox entering a hole near that very notch and disappearing into the pyramid's interior, as if ascending an unseen passage. The internal ramp theory remains unproven. Egyptian authorities haven't authorized the detailed scanning that would confirm or refute it, but it elegantly solves problems that other theories cannot. And it speaks to the sophisticated thinking of the original architects. They didn't just build a monument. They built a machine that constructed itself, incorporating the tools of its own creation into its final form. We've talked about scale, we've talked about logistics, but we haven't addressed the deepest mystery of all, the precision. How did a Bronze Age civilization align a structure to true north with an error smaller than modern buildings achieve? The Great Pyramid's base deviates from perfect cardinal alignment by just 3 arc minutes. That's 0.05 degrees. With no magnetic compasses, which hadn't been invented, with no GPS, with no telescopes. The answer may involve the stars. Egyptologist Kate Spence proposed that builders used 2 stars, Kochab and Mizar, which in 2500 BC circled opposite each other around the celestial pole. When these 2 stars aligned vertically, they pointed directly at true north. By watching and waiting for that precise moment, ancient surveyors could establish their baseline. Or perhaps they used the sun. In 2017, archaeologist Glenn Dash demonstrated that on the autumn equinox, a vertical rod casts a shadow that traces an almost perfectly east-west line. The technique is simple, requiring only a clear day and patience. And the slight counterclockwise error it produces matches almost exactly the error found in the Great Pyramid, the Khafre Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. The Egyptians left no blueprints, no engineering manuals, but they left something more important, proof that it could be done. The base is level to within 2.1 centimeters across 230 meters. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height gives you a value remarkably close to 2 times pi. Whether this was intentional or an emergent property of their chosen slope remains debated, but it demonstrates mathematical understanding that wouldn't be formally expressed for another 2,000 years. They built in stone what others couldn't even imagine. 4,500 years. The Great Pyramid has watched empires rise and fall. It stood when Rome was founded and when Rome burned. It was ancient when Julius Caesar visited. It was ancient when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. It was already 2,000 years old when Cleopatra lived. Earthquakes have shaken it. Grave robbers have plundered it. The fine white casing stones were stripped away in the Middle Ages to build mosques in Cairo. Yet it stands. Every other wonder of the ancient world has crumbled to dust. The Hanging Gardens, the Colossus of Rhodes, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Gone. The pyramid remains. Not because of magic, not because of alien technology, but because 20,000 workers laboring for 20 years applied everything their civilization knew to create something that would last forever. They succeeded. And perhaps that's the real lesson, not the ramps or the sledges or the water lubrication. The lesson is what humans can achieve when they believe in something larger than themselves. The pyramid builders weren't just constructing a tomb. They were building a statement, a declaration that their civilization existed, that it mattered, that it would be remembered when all else was forgotten. In that, they succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. We still don't know every detail of how they built it. We probably never will. New discoveries will continue to emerge from the sand. New technologies will reveal new secrets. The pyramid has kept its mysteries for 45 centuries. It will keep some of them forever. But we know enough to say this with certainty. The truth is more impressive than any myth. No aliens required. Just human beings working together, building something eternal. If you want to see how another impossible structure was built, how the Romans constructed the Colosseum in just 8 years using engineering secrets that would be lost for 1,000 years, that video is waiting for you. The ancient world was filled with builders who defied the impossible. This is just the beginning.